Christmas morning, December 2025. The walk from Sandringham House to St Mary Magdalene Church is one of the most photographed short distances in England. A few hundred yards of Norfolk gravel lined with well-wishers, press photographers, and the particular kind of frozen anticipation that comes from waiting for royals who will actually appear. Princess Beatrice and Princess Eugenie were among those who walked it that morning. They appeared alongside cousins, aunts, and the extended Wales family, dressed appropriately for the Norfolk cold, performing the ritual exactly as the occasion demanded. The photographers got their frames. The footage ran on every network. Their father wasn't there. Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor, that is his legal name now, formerly known until 2 months earlier as Prince Andrew, Duke of York, Knight of the Garter, Vice Admiral, Colonel of the Grenadier Guards, was somewhere else on the 20,000-acre estate. Not in the church walk photographs, not beside his daughters among the assembled family, not, as far as Buckingham Palace was concerned, part of the picture at all. No statement accompanied his absence. No spokesperson issued a clarifying note about the arrangement. The palace's Christmas press operation proceeded as if he didn't exist, which, in the increasingly precise operational terms of the institution, is, at this point, functionally accurate. That absence, the absence of a man from his daughter's side at the family's most publicly documented annual gathering, on an estate he has lived near for decades, in a family that has never historically struggled to close ranks, is the clearest single illustration of something that has been developing for 6 years. Prince William, Prince of Wales, has already decided what happens to the York family in the monarchy he will one day lead. He decided it privately. He has communicated it through accumulating exclusions, non-invitations, and a pattern of formal actions that travel under other people's names while pointing consistently in the same direction. The decision does not require a press release. The evidence is in what has already happened and what keeps happening. Before November 2019, Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor had spent 35 years as a reasonably active, reasonably visible senior member of the royal family. Born on the 19th of February 1960, Queen Elizabeth II's second son, he had served as a Royal Navy helicopter pilot during the Falklands War in 1982. Genuine frontline service, frequently cited by loyalists in the years that followed as the bedrock of his credibility. After leaving full-time naval service, he was appointed Special Representative for International Trade and Investment, a role he held from 2001 to 2011. He accumulated 230 patronages. He was Colonel of the Grenadier Guards, Colonel-in-Chief of multiple other regiments, and held a formal rank of Vice Admiral in the Royal Navy. He had once stood fourth in the line of succession, and that proximity to the throne had given him the institutional weight he carried into every room. His association with Jeffrey Epstein had been in the public domain for years before it became a genuine institutional crisis. Photographs of them together had circulated since the early 2000s. Virginia Giuffre, who alleged she had been trafficked by Epstein and forced to have sexual contact with Andrew when she was 17 years old, had been speaking to journalists since the mid-2000s. The palace's management of the story had, until 2019, relied on the standard toolkit: strategic silence, managed distance from Andrew, the gradual drift of public attention toward other things. It had worked, imperfectly and provisionally, for the better part of a decade. Then Andrew decided to manage it himself. The interview with Emily Maitlis was recorded at Buckingham Palace on November 14, 2019. It broadcast on BBC Newsnight 2 days later, on the evening of November 16th. It ran for 58 minutes. Andrew and his advisors appear to have calculated that a direct, transparent television engagement with the allegations would demonstrate openness, control the narrative, and put the story to rest. What they produced instead was 58 minutes of material that CNN summarized as a PR nightmare and a national joke simultaneously. A combination so rare, it requires its own analytical category. Mateless opened with the core allegation that Andrew had had sexual contact with Virginia Giuffre on 3 separate occasions, the first when she was 17 years old, at properties owned by Jeffrey Epstein in New York, London, and the U.S. Virgin Islands. Andrew denied any sexual contact whatsoever and said he had no recollection at all of ever meeting Giuffre. He didn't simply deny and move on, he elaborated, and the elaborations were what made the interview historically notable. His alibi for the night of March 10, 2001, the specific date Giuffre alleged the first encounter occurred at Epstein's Manhattan townhouse, was that he had taken his daughter Beatrice to a Pizza Express restaurant in Woking for a birthday party. He offered this detail with confidence. "I was at home. I was with the children. I had taken Beatrice to a Pizza Express in Woking for a party at, I suppose, 4 or 5 in the afternoon." Not a vague recollection of being elsewhere. Not a general denial supported by a general alibi. A Pizza Express. In Woking. With his daughter. The specificity, intended to convey certainty, struck most viewers as precisely the kind of detail that a person invents rather than recalls. The restaurant chain became the most discussed fast food brand in British tabloid history within approximately 24 hours. The sweating claim compounded it. Giuffre had described the man she was with as sweating heavily during the encounter. Andrew explained that he couldn't have been that man because, as a result of an adrenaline overdose sustained during the Falklands War, he had developed a medical condition that left him physically incapable of perspiring. He acknowledged some gradual recovery of sweating ability in the years that followed, but maintained that at the relevant time, the condition would have made his alleged behavior impossible to identify by that symptom. A member of the royal family had gone on the BBC to explain that he didn't sweat. The phrase completed its journey through every newspaper front page within hours of transmission. Then came the Epstein relationship itself. Andrew told Mateless he had returned to Epstein's Manhattan townhouse in December 2010, after Epstein had already been convicted in 2008 of soliciting a minor for prostitution and served 13 months in a Florida county jail, specifically to tell Epstein, face-to-face, that their continued association had become inappropriate. The visit lasted several days. It included social engagements with other guests. Andrew acknowledged, in retrospect, that this was the wrong thing to do. He then explained that he didn't regret the friendship itself, because the people he had met and the opportunities he had been given to learn, either by Epstein or because of him, were actually very useful. At another point in the interview, discussing his character, he described himself as being too honorable, presenting personal honor as simultaneously a defining trait and a kind of vulnerability that had led him, perhaps, into situations he had not fully anticipated. Emily Mateless later stated that Andrew had lost the respect of the nation with that interview. What that framing didn't capture is the more specific institutional consequence. The interview eliminated every option the palace had previously deployed to manage the Epstein connection. Before Newsnight, the palace could rely on strategic silence, gradual distancing, and the limited attention span of the news cycle. After Newsnight, Andrew had put himself on camera for 58 minutes and demonstrated, in specific and quotable detail, that he understood neither the gravity of the allegations against him nor the degree to which the institution he represented required him to, at minimum, perform contrition for victims. You can't return to strategic silence after 58 minutes of the opposite. 4 days after the broadcast, on November 20th, 2019, Buckingham Palace announced that Andrew was stepping back from public duties for the foreseeable future. His role as Chancellor of the University of Huddersfield was simultaneously relinquished. Sponsoring organizations began publicly withdrawing their associations within days of the interview. Over the weeks that followed, all 230 of Andrew's patronages were effectively relinquished, a number that represents more than a decade of accumulated institutional relationships, gone in a matter of weeks. Andrew issued a statement. He said he had asked Her Majesty if I may step back from public duties for the foreseeable future, and that she had given her permission. The framing was careful to make the decision sound bilateral, a man voluntarily choosing to stand aside out of appropriate concern for the institution, rather than an institution removing him under duress. It wasn't a voluntary choice in any meaningful operational sense. The interview had made his continuation in public duties untenable, and the people around the Queen understood this before Andrew had finished his last answer to Mateless. The person who reportedly understood it most clearly, and most angrily, was Prince William. Russell Myers serves as royal editor of the Daily Mirror and authored William and Catherine, The Monarchy's New Era, a book drawing on palace contacts cultivated across years of royal coverage. His reporting describes William holding what he characterizes as very staunch views about Andrew in the aftermath of the Newsnight broadcast. Not complicated views, not views that involved weighing competing considerations. Staunch. Myers describes William urging both King Charles and the late Queen Elizabeth to move against Andrew decisively, not to manage his access or restrict his duties further, but to remove him from royal life entirely. The Telegraph, reporting on the same body of material in February 2026, put the timeline in language that is worth noting precisely. William had argued for Andrew to be banished from royal life 7 years ago, before the rot further set in. 7 years back from February 2026 places that argument in the Newsnight period. The word rot, not scandal, not situation, not matter, indicates how William, according to these accounts, was framing the problem. You don't manage rot by negotiation. You cut it out. The Mirror's February 2026 headline from Myers' account was unambiguous. William wanted Andrew banished and rode with Charles over stain on royal family. The reported row with Charles over this question is significant in itself. Charles's instinct, according to multiple reports, ran toward graduated management, the kind of careful, staged approach that avoids the drama of complete rupture and preserves the institution's ability to present each decision as proportionate to circumstances. William's reported instinct was for something faster and more total. The disagreement between them over the pace and scale of Andrew's removal appears to have been genuine and, at times, heated. Omid Scobie, whose book Endgame examined this period from a different set of palace contacts, characterized the dynamic this way. Queen Elizabeth II was the official face of Andrew's reckoning, but it was William who had set the wheels in motion. The Queen's name and authority were the instruments through which formal action was taken. The sustained private pressure that created the conditions for those instruments to be used came from elsewhere. From a nephew who, according to Myers, was furious when Andrew was subsequently invited to Sandringham for Christmas 2023, despite his formal exclusion from official duties, and who had consistently pushed for a tougher line on the question of his uncle. It's necessary to be precise about the evidentiary status of all of this. No Kensington Palace statement has ever confirmed William's behind-the-scenes role. Every sourced account of his private lobbying comes through royal correspondence citing unnamed palace contacts or through author analysis. Myers, Scobie, and the unnamed insiders they draw on are the chain through which this version of events travels. William himself has ignored direct questions about the royal family's response to the Epstein allegations when asked publicly. Footage of him doing exactly that exists and is documented. He hasn't, and won't, publicly acknowledge the mechanics of what happened to his uncle. This public silence isn't accidental. It's, as this entire story demonstrates, how William operates. The official chronology of Andrew's formal removal from the institution contains two distinct events, separated by 3.5 years, and the distinction between them matters for understanding how the institution actually moves when it moves against one of its own. The first came on January 13, 2022. The timing wasn't coincidental. The previous day, January 12th, U.S. District Judge Lewis A. Kaplan had denied Andrew's motion to dismiss Virginia Giuffre's civil lawsuit in the Southern District of New York. Andrew's legal team had argued the case should be dismissed on the basis of a 2009 settlement agreement between Giuffre and Epstein that they claimed bound Giuffre not to bring further claims against any of Epstein's associates. Judge Kaplan rejected that argument. The lawsuit was proceeding. Discovery was coming. Depositions were coming. Everything that palace management of the story had been designed to prevent was now becoming inevitable through the U.S. court system. Buckingham Palace issued a statement within 24 hours. The language was clinically precise. The Duke of York's military affiliations and royal patronages have been returned to the Queen. Returned. As if they had been temporarily lent out and were now simply being collected. Andrew's colonelcies, including the Grenadier Guards and other regimental appointments, were gone. His HRH styling in any official capacity was gone. The Queen's approval and agreement were cited as the governing authority. What Andrew retained at this stage was his Duke of York title and his formal designation as Prince Andrew. This was a significant technical distinction that the press coverage largely elided. He remained a duke and a prince in name while being, in every operational sense, a private individual who happened to occupy a 30-room mansion on the Windsor estate. Virginia Giuffre's civil case settled in February 2022. The terms were undisclosed. In documentation connected to the settlement, Andrew acknowledged that Giuffre was an established victim of abuse. The case was dismissed by the parties' stipulation in March 2022. The legal proceeding that had triggered the January 2022 palace action was resolved. Andrew wasn't reinstated to anything. The second formal event came on October 30th, 2025. King Charles III initiated what Buckingham Palace described in a formal statement as a formal process to remove the style, titles, and honors of Prince Andrew. The 2022 action had taken his military affiliations and HRH in official use. The 2025 action took everything else. The Prince designation went. The Duke of York title went. His name was removed from the registers of the Order of the Garter and the Royal Victorian Order. His biography was deleted from the official royal family website. He was removed from the roll of the peerage. Reuters, the BBC, People magazine, and Al Jazeera all confirmed the action and its terms. Every institutional trace of his formal position in the family was removed in a single day's paperwork. The man who had been Colonel of the Grenadier Guards, Vice Admiral of the Royal Navy, and the Queen's second son, was now legally and officially Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor, the surname attached to every Windsor descendant who lacks a royal title. A technical point worth registering. Formally stripping Andrew of his dukedom against his expressed will would have required an act of Parliament, which would have meant a public parliamentary debate engaging specifically with the Epstein allegations, the Giuffre settlement, and Andrew's conduct. The institution didn't want that debate. What happened instead was a negotiated process in which Andrew agreed to cease using his titles rather than having them removed by legislative force. The outcome was functionally identical. The mechanism was considerably quieter, which is precisely how the institution preferred it. ITV reported at the time that William had been consulted on the October 2025 decision. That word, consulted, carries more institutional weight than its bureaucratic flatness suggests. It places William inside the deliberative process. Multiple sources cited in subsequent reporting indicate that William considered even the October 2025 stripping insufficient as a final outcome, that the removal of titles was a necessary step, but not an end point. The what comes next, in his reported view, is total exclusion from every dimension of royal life. The Times, drawing on sources with knowledge of William's thinking, reported that when William becomes king, Andrew will be barred from all elements of royal life, public events, private family ceremonies, state occasions, and royal gatherings of any kind. Reports from March 2026 extended that framing to include Charles's eventual funeral, with sources describing William's position as firm and already concluded. That specific claim, the funeral exclusion, circulates primarily through entertainment outlets rather than through the Times or the Telegraph, and its certainty should be calibrated accordingly. But the general direction documented consistently across multiple credible royal reporters is the same. Andrew won't be present for any of it. Before the eviction came, the Royal Lodge had been a 3-year territorial standoff that mirrored the broader political one. Royal Lodge is a 30-room mansion on the Windsor estate, set in roughly 98 acres of grounds that served historically as the principal private residence of the late Queen Mother. Andrew had held a lease on the property since 2003, a formal leasehold arrangement that gave him a legal basis for occupancy beyond the purely personal relationship with the estate. After his November 2019 step back from public duties, Royal Lodge became his permanent residence. When Queen Elizabeth II died in September 2022 and Charles acceded, Charles reportedly wanted Andrew to vacate and move to Frogmore Cottage, the smaller property on the same Windsor estate that Harry and Meghan had occupied and then vacated after their departure from working royal life. The symbolic signal in that proposed move wasn't subtle. Frogmore Cottage was where the family relocated people who had left. Andrew declined. He produced his lease documentation, asserting his legal right to remain at Royal Lodge regardless of what the new king preferred. Charles's response involved removing furnishings from the property, citing maintenance and security concerns as the administrative justification. The furnishings removal was simultaneously a pressure tactic and a message that could be discussed purely in terms of property management if anyone asked. Andrew remained in the house. The security question became increasingly visible. Taxpayer-funded protection for Andrew had been maintained until 2022. Charles then covered the costs privately from his own resources until 2024, when he ceased that funding as well. After losing royal-funded protection, Andrew's personal security detail reportedly cost up to £3 million per year. A financial backer, whose identity hasn't been publicly confirmed, reportedly emerged to cover those costs, a development that prompted questions from UK government officials about the source of the funding. Separately, whistleblower civil servants accused Andrew of having charged the taxpayer for massages and excessive personal travel costs during his years as a working royal, adding a further layer of financial controversy to a situation that was already generating significant scrutiny. Reports from a single outlet placed Andrew's compensation demand for a voluntary departure from Royal Lodge at £75 million, approximately $99 million at prevailing exchange rates. Whether that figure represents an actual negotiating position or a version of events filtered through unnamed sources isn't confirmed by palace statements or legal filings. What is documented is that he did eventually leave. The October 2025 announcement came with simultaneous confirmation that Andrew was being evicted from Royal Lodge. He also surrendered his lease on East Lodge, a smaller Crown Estate cottage in Berkshire. Sarah Ferguson, Andrew's ex-wife, they divorced in 1996, but had continued to share Royal Lodge, was also required to vacate. Andrew relocated to a temporary property on the Sandringham estate, remaining on royal land and dependent on the family for accommodation, but no longer in the 30-room house he had occupied for 22 years. He made, according to the National's reporting, an 11-word plea during the eviction process. What those 11 words were hasn't been confirmed in the public record. The Andrew story is sufficiently dramatic to have partially obscured a quieter, colder, and arguably more revealing set of decisions about the two women who happened to share his surname. Princess Beatrice, born August 8, 1988, is Andrew's elder daughter. Princess Eugenie, born March 23, 1990, is the younger. Both hold the style His Royal Highness. Both attend family events. Beatrice and Eugenie were present at the coronation of King Charles III on the 6th of May, 2023. Eugenie posted about it on Instagram. Both appeared in various photographs taken at Westminster Abbey that day. Neither held a formal ceremonial role in the coronation service itself. Both were at Sandringham for Christmas Day 2025, appearing in the church walk photographs, present and correct for the ritual. Their father wasn't among them. Neither woman holds a working royal role. This isn't historically anomalous. Not every person with a royal title is a working royal, but it carries different weight given the specific circumstances in which they now operate. After Harry and Meghan stepped back from senior royal duties in early 2020, the working royal pool contracted noticeably. Commentators pointed to the arithmetic: a reduced complement of active working royals, an aging cohort, and two royal women in their mid to late 30s with the education, charitable profiles, and public presence to fill some of the operational gap. The logic of elevating Beatrice and Eugenie to official working roles seemed, to those commentators, to write itself. The reporting suggests William read that logic and declined it. Princess Beatrice, now 37, works for the technology firm Affinity, a position that constitutes her primary professional identity rather than a part-time arrangement around royal duties. Princess Eugenie, 35, works at the International Art Gallery Hauser and Wirth. These aren't ceremonial sinecures. They are substantive private sector careers held by women who aren't drawing royal incomes or conducting public engagements on behalf of the institution. Both have received some modest charitable appointments in the recent period. Beatrice as deputy patron of Outward Bound, Eugenie as a mentor in the King's Foundation's 35 Under 35 network. Those appointments were King Charles's initiative, specifically noted in Royal Observer coverage as Charles gently repositioning his nieces. The framing is careful to attribute the initiative to Charles rather than to the broader institution. The scale of the appointments tells its own story. Deputy patron of Outward Bound is a respectable position. It isn't what working royals do. Their children carry no royal titles. Beatrice has two daughters, Sienna Mapelli-Mozzi, born September 2021, and Athena Mapelli-Mozzi, born January 2023. Eugenie has two sons, August Brooksbank, born February 2021, and Ernest Brooksbank, born May 2023. All four were deliberately given no royal designations by their mothers. Both women opted out of the convention that might have attached a princess or prince designation to the next generation. Whether this reflects a sincere personal preference for private life, or a very clear and accurate reading of where the institution is heading under William, is difficult to separate. Those two things aren't mutually exclusive. William and Catherine's relationship with the sisters is reported to have cooled considerably. Meyer's account notes that William used to see Beatrice and Eugenie, the past tense bearing significant analytical weight, with an implication that as Andrew's position became increasingly untenable, proximity to his daughters became a complication William declined to absorb. Reports citing unnamed palace sources indicate the sisters were asked not to attend Royal Ascot, one of the most prominent events in the royal social calendar, during the period of heightened press coverage around their father. A separate report attributed to unnamed sources at the palace described William requesting other royals avoid being photographed with Beatrice and Eugenie during a specific window of particularly intensive Andrew-related coverage. The mechanism, if these accounts are accurate, was careful and specific. Not a public ban, not a formal exclusion, but a quiet request communicated through internal channels that accomplishes the outcome without generating the headline. King Charles has made a point of signaling that Beatrice and Eugenie's personal status, their HRH designations, their places at family events, won't be affected by what happened to their father. His October 2025 statement establishing the process for Andrew's title removal didn't touch the sisters' designations. The December 2025 Christmas gathering was the most visible illustration of the principle. They were there, their father wasn't. Charles's guarantee of their status is clear and documented. That guarantee, however, is Charles's to give. It does not transfer automatically to the next reign. The theoretical framework underpinning William's specific decisions about the Yorks is the concept Charles has discussed throughout his public life as the slimmed-down monarchy. The idea has a longer intellectual history than Charles's association with it. Academic commentators were writing about pressure for a streamlined royal family well before Charles had any institutional authority to act on it. The argument is intuitive. Fewer working royals produces fewer costs, fewer reputational risks, tighter institutional coherence, and a smaller surface area for the kind of scandal that can consume a news cycle for months. Victorian and Edwardian royal families ran to dozens of titled relatives with official positions and court roles. The 20th century contracted that considerably. By the time of Charles's accession in September 2022, the working royal complement had reached approximately 7: Charles, Camilla, William, Catherine, Princess Anne, Prince Edward, and Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh. Harry and Meghan had departed working duties in early 2020. Andrew had been gone since 2019. The Yorks, in their various configurations, were never part of this reduced calculation. Charles III, new king, new court. The inside story documents Charles's institutional philosophy in terms of operational efficiency. The monarchy functions most effectively when it's compact, when the people representing it can be held accountable for their conduct, and when the costs of maintaining them are defensible to the public. A source cited in that biography connects this to Charles's understanding that any organization reaches maximum effectiveness when small. That framing converts the slimmed-down concept from a dynastic preference into a management philosophy, something to be applied systematically rather than adjusted sentimentally case by case. An Institute for Government Analysis from 2023 specifically named whether the monarchy should be slimmed down as one of the key challenges facing the institution's future leadership. It appeared alongside questions about royal financing and democratic accountability as a structural issue requiring deliberate policy rather than reactive improvisation. That framing, as institutional policy rather than family drama, matches the way William's approach is consistently described by those who report on it. William's reportedly stricter version of Charles's vision adds a dimension that Charles's approach does not include at the same intensity. What multiple correspondents have characterized as brand protection, Meyer's book frames William and Catherine as having incorporated the Andrew fallout deliberately into a project of building a monarchy defined by genuine accountability, rather than inherited entitlement. An institution where association with reputational risk is severed early, completely, and permanently. Royal biographer Andrew Lowney, assessing William's direction explicitly, characterizes it as a move toward a more European model. Smaller, less ceremonially elaborate, defined by working contribution rather than bloodline proximity. Several European royal houses have long operated with a clear functional distinction between those who work in an official capacity and those who simply carry family names. The former receive institutional support and public representation. The latter are relatives. The operational logic of that distinction isn't complicated. Neither is its implication for Beatrice and Eugenie. Reports citing people described as William's friends and allies suggest that when he becomes king, his plan includes removing HRH designations and princely or princess titles from non-working royals who aren't performing active institutional functions. Under such a model, the titles Beatrice and Eugenie currently hold, protected by Charles's specific guarantee for the duration of his reign, wouldn't survive the transition to William's. They would retain their places in the line of succession. They would remain members of the family in the private sense, but the designation that currently marks them as part of the institutional apparatus would be removed. Their children, who already carry no royal titles by their mother's deliberate choice, would be entirely outside the royal nomenclature. Who will actually be inside William's monarchy, then, when the transition eventually comes? Catherine, Princess of Wales, is the structural anchor. She spent the first 15 years of her royal life building a public profile defined by disciplined consistency, a relatively narrow focus on early childhood development, mental health, and the Shaping Us campaign, delivered without the kind of variability that creates hostages to fortune. When she was diagnosed with cancer and withdrew from public duties in early 2024, she returned in mid-2024 in a carefully managed sequence that reinforced rather than diminished her public standing. She is the institution's most recognizable face after the monarch, and she has given no indication of intending to occupy that position with anything other than deliberate seriousness. Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh, has become one of the most operationally dependable working royals of the current generation. She has taken on high-sensitivity engagements, visits to Ukraine, work on conflict-related sexual violence, that require a particular combination of seriousness and steadiness. She isn't glamorous in the way that generates magazine covers, but she doesn't generate the calls that send press offices into crisis management either. Prince Edward operates in the same register, consistent, present, unthreatening to the institutional image. Both are, in the language of the royal reporters who cover them, stalwart working royals, which is a phrase that means they do the work without creating additional problems. Princess Anne, now in her mid-70s, has historically maintained the highest volume of public engagements of any senior royal across multiple decades, a record sustained through a combination of personal discipline and a conspicuous indifference to the kind of reputational exposure that has damaged other members of the family. She isn't a source of institutional risk. Under William, she will continue in whatever capacity her age and energy allow. The 20-year calculation is about George, Charlotte, and Louis. Prince George, 12 at the time of the October 2025 title stripping, is already an occasional ceremonial presence. Princess Charlotte, 10, and Prince Louis, 7, are still in the early phases of public visibility, but represent, in the institutional arithmetic, the next generation of active working royals. William is building a monarchy with a long runway. By the time his children are fully active in public royal life, the people he isn't including, the Yorks in their various configurations, will have been absent from the institutional frame long enough that their absence registers as the natural order of things, rather than a decision anyone specifically made. This is the sophistication of the approach. William isn't conducting a dramatic purge that generates its own headlines and requires its own management. He is administering a timeline. The exclusions he has reportedly driven, or influenced, or been consulted on, the precise verb depending on the specific action in question, have each proceeded at a pace that allowed the institution to absorb them without the convulsive public debate a more abrupt approach might have triggered. Andrew didn't lose everything in November 2019. He lost public duties first, then military titles and HRH in official use. Then, 3.5 years later, everything else. Each step was framed as a proportionate response to specific external events. The Newsnight interview, the Giuffre lawsuit motion denial, the accumulating pressure through 2024 and 2025. The destination of each step, however, appears to have been understood by at least one member of the family before any of those external events made action formally necessary. In the operational language of royal communications, absence isn't neutral. It's a specific communication. When a senior royal does not appear at an event they would historically have attended, that non-appearance has to be decided by someone. An invitation list is reviewed by someone. A question about who will be in the procession receives an answer from someone. A photographer is briefed about which family group shot will and won't include which relatives. These are active decisions, administered by people with institutional authority, not passive outcomes of circumstance. The monarchy does not accidentally fail to include someone. Exclusion is managed. William's particular fluency in this form of communication is that it requires him to say nothing publicly while communicating volumes institutionally. He reportedly declined to attend events at which Andrew was present, a decision that is simultaneously a statement and something that can never be quoted because it was never spoken. It exists as a pattern of behavior across enough specific occasions that the pattern becomes the record. The Times reported this as a firm William position. The reporting on its existence is single-sourced in the specific sense, but it's consistent with every other documented element of how William has approached the Andrew question across 6 years. Beatrice and Eugenie occupy a different position in this framework. They aren't persona non grata in the acute way their father is. They attend the coronation. They appear at Sandringham. They exist in the photographs, at the edge of the frame, dressed correctly for the occasion. What they don't do is represent the institution at engagements, appear in the briefings that describe the palace's active roster of senior royals, or exercise any of the formal functions that distinguish working royals from the broader family. They exist in what the British royal system has never bothered to formally name, the middle zone between institutional membership and private life. Royal enough to be photographed walking to church on Christmas morning, private enough to hold 9-to-5 positions at a technology company and an art gallery. Neither fully in nor formally out, which is itself a position, one that, in the monarchy William is building, will become increasingly difficult to maintain in its current ambiguous form. By December 2025, Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor had been absent from official royal duties for more than 6 years, had lost his military affiliations in January 2022, had lost every remaining designation in October 2025, had been evicted from Royal Lodge, had his biography removed from the royal family website, and had his name struck from the roll of the peerage. His daughters attended Christmas at Sandringham without him in his first December after the complete stripping of his titles. His grandchildren, 4 of them between the ages of 2 and 4, carry no royal designations because their mothers chose not to pass them on. The man who reportedly drove this outcome has said nothing publicly about any of it. William, Prince of Wales, hasn't commented on his uncle's removal, hasn't addressed his cousin's institutional status, hasn't confirmed or denied his behind-the-scenes role. He ignored the question when it was asked directly in public. Kensington Palace does not confirm what royal correspondents report about his private positions. And yet Myers describes his view as very staunch. The Mirror's headline placed him in a row with Charles over the stain on royal family. The Telegraph confirmed he had been arguing for this outcome since the Newsnight period. The Telegraph's sourcing said, 7 years ago. ITV confirmed he was consulted when the final action came in October 2025. Multiple reporters, working from independent sets of palace contacts, arrived at the same conclusion about the same person's role across the same years. The accumulation of that sourcing, while none of it's officially confirmed, isn't easy to dismiss as coordinated invention. The architecture William is building does not require a press conference. It requires consistency, institutional access, and the particular patience of a man who understands that the most durable decisions are the ones that look, in retrospect, like gravity. As if no specific person had to choose them, as if they simply followed inevitably from circumstances. Every name missing from a guest list, every Christmas photograph taken without a specific face, every formal process carrying another monarch's signature that removes another layer of designation from a man whose institutional position Andrew assumed was permanent. Andrew Lowney says William will move toward a more European model of monarchy. In practical terms, that means the institution will be smaller, tighter, defined by working contribution rather than bloodline proximity. There is no working contribution the Yorks can make. There hasn't been since the evening of 16th November 2019, when Emily Maitlis asked a senior royal to explain a pizza express in Woking and a medical condition that prevented sweating. The Yorks' position in William's future monarchy was decided in private sometime around that evening, communicated through absence and exclusion ever since. By the time the formal record catches up completely, by the time whatever decisions William makes as king are officially announced, the reality will have been in place for so long, it will seem like it was always true. William hasn't said so. He doesn't need to. The Sandringham Church walk photographs from December 2025 say it for him. Subscribe for more stories like this.